Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Fruition Group's latest episode of Diary of a CIO. I'm Sarah Paulson, the host of this podcast, and I am delighted to welcome our guest today, Rob Hesmondhalgh. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly,
Perfect.
Rob.
Yeah.
Excellent. Rob is a seasoned Chief Information Officer and was working very recently at Lineup Systems, who are a global provider of media sales and revenue management software. Rob has played a pivotal role in, leading Lineup and guiding Lineup through a period of growth and transformation, helping to scale the business and lead the technology strategy through to a successful exit, delivering an 8 times return on investment. So some happy investors in the background there as well, Rob. Rob brings real world experience of how technology can drive value in sort of fast moving PE, VC backed environments. He's also an active voice in the tech leadership community, regularly sharing insights on decision making and innovation and overall organisational effectiveness. Outside of work, with the very little free time that Rob has, he partakes in Spartan racing, which we can dig into a little bit more because that sounds super interesting, and getting time away from the keyboard by making sure he's regularly walking his 2 dogs. So there's a very quick intro to our guest. So thank you again for joining me, Rob.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. So I think, look, given your experience and your really current experience at Lineup Systems, where you supported the business through to a very successful exit, I think we'd really like to focus today's session on what it means to be a CIO in a PE-backed business, the pressures, the trade-offs, and how technology can genuinely drive value at exit. Before we start to delve into a bit more detail around that, it'd be great to get to know you a little bit more and understand a bit more about your career journey and sort of path trajectory to CIO. And I guess I'm going to start my first question, as I do with everybody on this podcast. When did you realise you wanted to move into technology leadership and reach that kind of those heights of being a CIO? Was it kind of something you've always strived towards?
No, absolutely not. And if you go way back into the dark and distant past, I wasn't on track to go into technology at all. I actually went to art school. I didn't go to university to do a tech degree or a maths degree or anything like that. So I was on a completely different track. I ended up stumbling into technology back in the very early 90s. And that's before everyone had email even, never mind the World Wide Web and all the things that happened in between. So I sort of stumbled into it at the beginning. I had an affinity for it. I'd been playing with computers since I was quite small, and just it grabbed me. So I loved doing it. I've done just about every role you can think of in IT. I've been a software engineer. I've been a DBA, assistant administrator, network administrator, network engineer, all sorts of management and leadership roles in between. I've done consulting, I've done business analysis, etc. So I've been all over the place, and I think that's what gave me a basis to start moving up that chain to become a CIO, because I think CIOs really should have quite a broad knowledge of technology, because they're often having to deal with lots of different disciplines, and they're dealing with lots of very clever people who know those disciplines really well. So you at least need to know them well enough to ask the right questions and maybe even understand the answers as well. So I think it was accidental at first, and then just growing a base that led towards more and more responsibility and more leadership.
So was there kind of a pivotal point or an experience that kind of shaped your journey and that kind of focused you to go beyond, a technology leader and move up to kind of that C-level role? Because there's a very big difference in responsibility and pressure that goes with that.
Yeah, there are probably a few inflection points over the years. A really important one when I was working for Siemens. Siemens had a consulting arm at the time called Siemens Business Services, and working there in a group called Global Media Consulting. And I think I was opened up to a lot more senior, strategic, big thinking, not tactical stuff, not solving problems, not doing the day to day, but looking at huge 5 and 10 year plans and strategies for big companies like the BBC, for example. And that really got me into the strategic side of things rather than doing an individual specific, maybe tactical role.
Mhm.
And then later, when I joined Lineup, um, Lineup had just really come out of its startup phase. It was going into that scale up, that rapid growth period, and that's one of those things where you want there to be lots of experimentation and innovation and people just trying stuff because you want to try things all the time. You want to be doing new things,
Yeah.
but at the same time, you have to try and get some kind of control over it, or at least the illusion of control over it, and be able to steer it in the right direction. And so that was a very different thing. That's not management, that is leadership. That's taking people where you want them to go, but not necessarily telling them how to get there or forcing them to do it in a particular way. It's being able to paint a vision for people, it's being able to show them what you're trying to achieve and what's possible. And I think that was a big thing for me, the opportunities I got at Lineup in particular to do things, to try things out, but also to shape where we were going. That was huge for me, and obviously that then led to me being the CIO of Lineup for the latter half of my time there.
And how did you do that then? How do you take your team or teams on a journey with you where you're not, I guess, directing them, that you are very much bringing them along with you without them perhaps realizing that's what's
Yeah,
happening?
I'm I have a very strong belief in this idea of creating momentum. And that might sound a bit cliched, but I I think I literally mean it. You have to create some kind of momentum because you can't be everywhere at once, and you can't be just tapping on people's shoulders and saying, "Hey, remember we're trying to do this week." So to do that, you have to really be able to not just create, but also communicate a vision to people. This is what we're trying to achieve. This is why we're trying to achieve it. And this is our definition of good. And this is what we're trying to avoid. Make sure people really understand what the company is trying to do at a strategic level.
Mhm.
Then make them understand where they fit into that individually. Each person needs to know how they're contributing to getting to that point that you're aiming for, which you may well miss, but you hopefully will get close to, and you'll get something that's at least in the ballpark of what you wanted. So everyone needs to know what part they're playing and how they're going to make that thing happen. And the combination of those two things with regular feedback as well. So you need to have clear metrics, clear indicators of, are we on target? Are we drifting off? Are we going in the right direction? Make sure that's communicated all the time. And with that, you can create a momentum so that you don't have to be everywhere all the time. You need to be communicating constantly. You need to be as open and honest with people as you possibly can. Not always possible, but as much as you can. And so they do feel involved, they do feel part of what's happening. And then when you're not there and they need to make decisions, they're probably going to make the right decisions and they're probably going to run in the right direction. So it's all about that momentum, which is not easy to build.
And where has that leadership style come from? Has somebody influenced your leadership style? Has that just come through tried and tested, getting things wrong, getting things right?
I've probably got quite a few people to thank for that. I'm
Okay.
not sure. I'm worried to name names because if I miss someone out, then they're going to be upset and offended. But yeah, there's been a few people who've had a massive influence on how I think about these things and the really big picture ideas about these things. I'd say there was a gentleman I worked for back at Siemens, a man called Marcus Gonzalez Flower, and he was an incredible leader of people, an incredible. He painted pictures, he made you see what was possible. Quite inspiring in that sense. And I think I got a lot of the communication side of things from him. And that was a big thing we focused on all the time there. We were doing a lot of consulting work. Communication is just the heart of everything you do there. So I think he drove that side of things. Back at Lineup, the CEO I was working for, Chris Spalding, was an absolute expert in how you lead a company and how you run a company and the different dimensions you have to be worrying about all at the same time, and how you may seem to be talking about one thing, but actually it's driving something else. There's all sorts of moving parts that you're coordinating constantly and how to keep on top of them. And he was also excellent in terms of clarity, making sure nothing was hidden, if at all possible. Make sure everyone knows the figures, they know the numbers, they know if we're tracking correctly, they know where we're missing, they know what they can do to try and catch that up. He was a great one for sharing that. So I think those two in particular have had a big influence on that.
Sure. And I guess thinking about the personal side of leadership and progression as your career, I guess there's pros and cons, right? And there's always going to be some sort of sacrifice along the way as you're progressing your career. And when we talked before we hit record, you mentioned about getting time away from your keyboard and away from work is difficult to have time.
Yeah.
How do you manage balance in such a demanding role, and can balance with some sort of personal life be achieved at sea level?
Yeah, I think it can. I don't think I'm special or unusual in that I don't really turn off. So I do literally have to take myself away from the keyboard and the screen to get some kind of separation. But I can still be sitting watching TV and I'll be thinking about the problem I'm trying to solve at work. And usually that's when the solutions come to you, when you're not thinking about it directly, but it's still churning away in the back of your mind. So I don't think there is a work-life balance that works for everyone. I think everyone has different needs and enjoys that balance in different ways. I actually love technology. One of the reasons I have to physically drag myself and separate myself from my laptop is because even when I'm not working, I love tinkering with stuff. I love trying out new things. Last week, I was building agentic artificial intelligence tools just because I wanted to know how that all works. And it was fascinating stuff. And that's fun to me. But I do realize I have to stop doing that sometimes and I have to go and do other things. So it's a tough one for me to answer because it almost sounds like I'm a martyr to this. No, I work so hard and I never switch off. But I'm not saying that as something that irritates me. I just I love computers. I love technology. I love reading stuff on tech websites, playing around with coding, etc. So I'm a bit of a victim of that deliberately.
Sure. But it sounds like if you do recognize the need to switch off, you've got to be fairly intentional in your actions to step away. Like
absolutely.
Yeah.
When the shutdown came 5 years ago now, I think it is, with COVID, and everyone started working from home. And I think many people discovered this thing that if you work in the place that you live, there is no separation anymore. Prior to that, your commute in the morning gave you time to prep your brain for the day, or to read a book, or to do something, but it was a buffer between home and work. Sure. And your commute back in the evening allowed you to switch off and leave things behind and drop those. When you're actually just walking into the kitchen to work on the dining room table, or you're sitting on the sofa working, and then the closest you get to separation is closing your laptop lid, it's not the same thing. So you have to artificially build it in. During those lockdown days, one of the things I used to do was spend some time before I started work. I used to do Duolingo Spanish, and that's what I used to do on the train in the morning. So I started doing it just before I started work in the day, just to create that artificial routine of separating home and work. And one of the things we did at Lineup during that period to try and create that routine again was we put lunch breaks into everybody's diary, because it's really easy if you're working at home to just not bother having a lunch break and not stopping. So we just banned meetings over this lunch period, and Not everybody always adhered to it, but at least it was there as something that you could always say, nope, sorry, I can't do that. That's our lunch break.
Sure.
So you have to artificially create these things, particularly if you're one of these people
Yeah.
who's a sucker for tech.
And how's your Spanish?
Awful, really awful.
Did you not keep it up when you went back to
I still try. I've learned lots of words. I
Okay.
just don't know how to put them all together in the right order
Right.
and to understand them when they're spoken back to me. I'll sit there with someone speaking Spanish to me, and I'm focusing on each individual word. I know that one, but I'm not really getting the sentences. So there's a long way to go yet.
Right. Good stuff. So let's move on to talking a bit about your experience at Lineup. You were kind of working for a PE-backed business. I know you've got experience working for a broad range of organisations, but I'm keen to understand how you think the role of a CIO differs when you have private equity investors.
I think the role of the CIO is one of those things where just about everyone has their own version of what it means anyway. I don't think it's a particularly strictly defined role. And it differs also quite dramatically if you're working for a tech firm or a non-tech firm. So if you're working for a non-tech firm, often at best, technology is seen as an enabler. The advantage of working for a tech firm, like I mostly have done through my life and like Lineup was, is as the CIO, you're kind of running a business within the business. You're running the bit that creates the product that you're selling. And that gives you a very different challenge than if you're just running corporate IT. So being a CIO in a tech firm, firstly, is its own set of challenges. You're probably to some degree running engineering, you're probably running some of the hosting side of the business, maybe technical support, as well as keeping corporate IT running, cybersecurity, etc., which is pretty much what Lineup was. Then if you've got investors, usually you have a very clear commercial and business vision for what you have to achieve from the investors. They will have expectations and targets. They're very good at laying them out, at turning them into measurable metrics that you can write down on a spreadsheet and track week by week. So you have a framework that you've got to work within. But I think the role of the CIO in an investor-backed tech company has to be, you've got to be creating the value in the company. It's a tech company. You're the most senior tech person there. So investors are always looking for value, whether it's VC or PE backed. They want to increase that value. They want to leverage it, exploit it, whatever, however you want to phrase it. That's on you. You've got to find ways of making the products more valuable. Obviously, your product management team are going to be driving that, but you've got to make it reality. You have to look at risk. Risk is a big thing with investor-backed companies, and it's not necessarily technical risk that we're used to as CIOs, but all sorts of other risks. They're looking at a future. They're wanting to grow the company at a particular pace, but without breaking it, which is always fun. But at some point, there's usually a sale on the horizon. And when you go to sell a tech company to another investor, risk is a huge thing that they look at. Is there a future for this technology, this platform that you're using, this product that you have? What are the inherent risks in your structure, in your organization, the people? All of those things are quite different with investor-backed than they are in a day-to-day running a business kind of thing. But yeah, to summarize the CIO investor-backed position, it's the value thing. And I think all CIOs should be creating value in the company. That's a thing that I focus on a lot. But with investor-backed, it kind of does stop with you.
Sure. And as you moved into the CIO role there, which you said was after 5 years, did you say?
About that, yeah.
About that. And obviously, now the investors are looking for you as the most senior person in technology to deliver that value, and you're accountable for that. Were there any surprises in your first year that kind of knocked you off piste a little bit?
I think I was lucky in that I already had a reasonable relationship with them. I've been running the delivery side of the business, the non-technical things, so the projects, the
Sure.
consultancy, etc. And so I already had a very strong foundation in the business, a good relationship with the leadership team, with the investors. So I knew what we were trying to do. Coming back to that vision of where we were trying to go to, I was fully aware of that. You're obviously course adjusting all the time, and as we went into my time there as a CIO, that changed dramatically as we got closer to a sale. But I think it was a fairly comfortable landing for me. Um, I think coming back to what I said about if you're in a tech company as a CIO, it really did come home to me, and maybe it was a little bit surprising just how much the tech side of the business, the CIO run side of the business, is make or break. You just can't afford to mess up. There was someone who used to work for us at Lineup who used to say, when you were at school, if you got 90% in an exam, you get an A, you get an A star. When you're here running the services that we provide to our customers, if we hit 90%, we're going to go out of business. We need to be at 99.99%. You're talking
Right.
about margins of error that you're just not used to. Um,
Sure.
that's quite revealing, and it's never ending. You can't have a day where you take your foot off the pedal.
Sure. And thinking about how technology evolved to drive value in that business specifically, um, what did you do? How did the tech evolve to kind of give you that 8 times return throughout your tenure there as a CIO? And what kind of impact did you have?
Well, you have the product driven side of the tech, so just innovating in the product, and that was a huge thing at Lineup. We really focused on trying to introduce new features that were not just eye catching, but really beneficial. So
Hmm.
we had a very strong product team working closely with the development team. And
Hmm.
one of the things that I did as CIO was try and drive that collaboration and that closeness as much as possible, because the more we did that, the better results we got. So there was a structural thing there. There was a collaborative thing there that I really drove, which was increasing value without actually building a thing. It was
Yeah.
changing how we operated to increase value. We did some technical things within the tech teams that we then turned into products, and that was unusual. I know some companies have grown out of that mentality, but that was we built our own tools that we needed to use for various reasons. I'll give you an example. There was immutable storage for our backups, and we had this immutable storage strategy, and we built a whole system and set of services around it for protecting all of our data and our
Hmm.
customers' data.
Hmm.
And we realized that that had value outside of what we were doing directly for the customers, because they had all this other data that was around our system
Sure.
that was effectively unprotected. So we then started to offer that as a product. That came purely out of our infrastructure team and what they were doing on the hosting side of things. So from a CIO point of view, I was particularly pleased with that one. It was one of those conversations one day with the head of infrastructure. Um, he was always very commercially minded, and he just came up with this great idea. We can actually start driving new revenue with something we've built ourselves, which was great. But on the other side of it, I think what you have to do if you're trying to drive value through the business, as a CIO should be doing, you need to look at how you create value. So the products that you're creating, and how you do that and how you deliver that value. Those are two of the important things. So maybe different delivery models. We originally offered both on-premise and SaaS services for our products. We scrapped the on-premise. It was actually more painful for everybody and more expensive for everybody to do it that way. So we re-engineered and retooled and became a pure SaaS company while I was there. That was one of the big moves. I think you need to be looking at how you're realizing that value as well. So how you're bringing that value back into the company. And that's working with the commercial teams about creating deals with customers, which is not really a tech role, but you need to understand the technical constraints before you're out there negotiating with someone on service level agreements and uptimes, etc. So I think as a CIO, I got involved in probably more than I should have done, but I got involved in just about everything. Sales, finance, some days I'm sure that irritated them. I was, I was overstepping my boundaries a bit, but I think with a tech company, you have to. Everything is going to come back to tech.
And going back to what you mentioned about having that very clear commercial vision and strategy at Lineup, where it was very clear what the investors were expecting, and I guess the milestones that you needed to hit and the metrics that you were striving towards. How do you balance that as a CIO with meeting those milestones, alongside making sure the technology is exit ready and the foundations are solid and it's robust and fit for purpose? There's a balancing act there, right? I guess.
Yeah, there's multiple streams happening all at once, particularly when you're getting close to that sale process. So a couple of years out from when we intended to go out to the market, one of the things we did was a health check on ourselves, and we brought in an external consultant so that it was completely independent. Mm-hmm. And we asked him to carry out due diligence on us as if he was a potential buyer of the company. And that was something that he did as his normal job. And so he came up with a very detailed report of strengths and weaknesses and risks, etc. The good news was most of them were already on our risk register or were somewhere in our plans, or we were aware of most of them, not all of them, because this guy was really good. But that didn't mean we were working on them, because as you say, you've got conflicting priorities here. You're trying to maybe keep this thing going, build this new thing over here. You've only got so many resources, so many hours in the day, so much money to play with. So that gave us a real focus on how to get ready for a sale process, how to make sure all of those things that may have been on our wish list and may have been on our risk register, we actually had a plan to address them all. And that's what we did. We built a 12-month plan that was prioritized by risk or value, depending upon what the issue was. And we committed to working through it, and we got that commitment right at board level. This is what we're going to do. It was tracked in every board meeting. So every month there would be a report on how we were doing against this. And I think you've got to do something like that, particularly if you're trying to be sale ready. You've got to take it seriously. You've got to structure it, and you've got to have buy-in right at the top and be held accountable right at the top. So that's how you prep it, and that's really a one-off exercise. But every CIO is balancing a similar thing, even if they're not prepping themselves for sale. So you've always got that list of things that you really want to do. You've always got that list of risks that you're slowly working on, but maybe they're not top of everyone else's agenda. And you're always fighting for the attention, for the resources, and it's always a compromise as well. We would have, depending upon where we were in our maturity, we would have, let's say, a 6-month release cycle for our software. And each release would be a combination of new features, maybe some fault fixing, maybe some performance improvements, all sorts of other things. And getting the right balance of that. Some of those fault fixes might be high on your list, but actually the customers aren't feeling them yet, but they will. So no one's screaming yet, but you want to be preemptive. And then there are things that are directly affecting people that you want to fix as soon as possible. New features, because you're going to try and keep ahead. Every technology, software type company has that same kind of balancing act that they're doing all the time. And it's really a case of understanding what the risks and the rewards are and trying to get the right balance.
I guess in a way, when you are working for a business that's moving towards exit, that benefit you have of having an external person come in and look at what you're doing and do that due diligence on you as a business, and as particularly for a technology company, there's a lot of focus on you. That must have been a huge amount of help and support. Whereas if you're not in an investor-backed business working towards exit, you don't always get that, do you? Very much it's on the shoulder and responsibilities of a CIO. I can imagine that's really stressful, and knowing that you're doing the right thing, and knowing that you're making the right decisions, because it's tough at the top, right? And it can also be very lonely as well, in terms of once you reach that point of your career, you're expected to know exactly what to do. How do you kind of have support in that role? Do you have a mentor, or have you got like a network, or have you got a kind of locker room of supporters somewhere that you kind of you talk to, or is it very much you've got your colleagues and your boss around you, and that's what you use for support?
The support comes from different directions. So I had at Lineup, I had a fantastic team just directly underneath me, my management team. Every single one of them was amazing at what they did, and they were great to discuss problem solving with and how we're going to address this next thing that's coming up. And if you don't have that kind of support from below and around you, I think it's incredibly lonely. And you're just coming up with ideas yourself. It's very difficult to test them against someone who really understands the domain, unless you've got those experts around you. So that's one thing that I think you need in terms of support. In terms of sort of mentoring, coaching, etc. I mentioned Chris Spalding earlier, the CEO of Lineup at the time. He was excellent at that. We would literally go for a walk around the block. One or other of us would see that the other one was stressed or trying to work something out or getting frustrated, and just go, hey, should we go for a walk? And we'd walk around the block, sometimes several times, just depending on how big the problem was. And it was every few days we would do this, and it was a great way, just getting out of the office, getting some air, getting some space between you and whatever you're trying to solve, and not necessarily understanding in detail the problem that the other person has, but being someone who can have a measured, intelligent conversation, ask questions that maybe they're not considering, sometimes stupid questions, but that's fine. So that was great as well. One thing that our investors did, and I've seen this with a few investors actually, but one thing our investors did was the chairman of other tech companies, and he would connect us together. So I would sometimes go and have a chat to the CTO of one of the other companies. Now, these aren't companies in a group. There's no real sort of shared ownership, but there is shared leadership on the boards. And that built a tiny, very well-informed, very senior group of people who could just call each other up and run something by them. I know that you faced this problem last year. How did you handle it? I know that you're looking at this. What are your thoughts on it? And that was really useful as well. And investor-backed companies often do that.
Yeah. And if you could redo the Lineup journey again, what would you do differently?
Nothing. It was perfect. There were mistakes along the way, if you want to call them mistakes, or learning points, or whatever the subtle phrase is for it these days. There were some things we did, particularly with trying to outsource development in order to accelerate or increase how much we could do in a period of time. And we did that without really being ready to do it. We learned some hard lessons there. One of the things that outsourcing or using offshore or nearshore development teams does is it really teaches you a lot about delegation, really teaches you to focus on really understanding what it is you want, the outcome that you want. And I think we had a couple of those that didn't go well. We had some that went brilliantly once we'd learned some lessons about how to work with external partners. So I'd probably maybe seek some advice before doing something like that you haven't done before. If you've never outsourced development before, for example, get some advice on how to make that work. Even if you think you understand it, you're going to get some surprises there. The relationship is very different from having a pretty much internal development team. That was quite a big one. That was fairly early on, thankfully. So we learned some lessons early, and we built on them. I think I don't know if it would even be possible, but I think in general, just move faster, make more mistakes, but live with them and move faster. I think sometimes you get a bit cautious. You're trying something completely new. You're trying something innovative and different, and you maybe slow down a bit. I think often it's better to go through it quicker. I remember when I was learning to drive a very long time ago, and I had quite a funny driving instructor. And whenever we got to those little sort of traffic calming measures where you've got a narrow bit of the road to go through, and as a learner driver, you're incredibly nervous with them. He always used to say, just line it up and just go through as fast as you can. Then at least if you hit them, it's over pretty quickly.
That's
So
brilliant.
yeah, I think that's the approach that you should take, particularly with a company that's trying to grow quickly.
Yeah, I think done is better than perfect, isn't it?
That is, I've got that pinned up somewhere. There's so many variations on that phrase, but it comes up just about every week. Don't
Yeah,
let perfect be the enemy of progress. And yeah,
yeah. I think it's very easy to overthink or over engineer the perfect solution, or I don't know, the perfect framework for a business. But sometimes, like you said, you've just got to put your foot down, and if you hit the bollard, you hit the bollard. It will all be
yeah,
okay, and it'll be over in a flash.
yeah.
And I
It's taking
think,
your wing mirror off, but at least you got to where you were going to.
yeah, very true. That sounds like a real kind of a fundamental lesson that you'll perhaps take on to your next CIO role.
Yeah, I think I'm not saying that we were slow at doing anything. We absolutely were. We had a constant mantra of pace,
Mhm.
keep the pace up, keep working at pace, keep that momentum going. It wasn't that. I just think actually you can be even faster than you expect you can. You can push things a lot further than you think, as long as you've got the fundamentals right. You've got the right checks and balances in place. There are some things you don't compromise on, like security and data privacy,
Mhm.
etc. If you've got
Mhm.
all of those things in place and secure, the other stuff that you're trying to do, whether it's innovative features or trying a new hosting strategy or whatever it happens to be, new technologies, run at them as fast as you possibly can. Because you can sit there for ages thinking and rethinking and going back over the possible things that could go wrong. It's actually better just to find out.
Sure. And there's lots of hopefully aspiring CIOs watching this, or CIOs that might be either seeking investment or having just secured investment or just be building up to go through that, I guess, transaction in the future. What advice would you give to a CIO working in that investor-led business or moving into that
Um,
space?
I think you could apply this to any CIO. It just applies doubly so to someone in an investor, a VC, or a PE-backed business. I think the CIO is actually a business role. It's not a technology role. The CIO should be the person who figures out how to create value for the business using technology, yes. But to do that, you need to understand how businesses work. So understand the business, understand the basics of finance, for example, understand the profit and loss and how to read it. And hopefully you own it as well, but really get to know it. Understand the things that make a big difference commercially to your business, cash flow and how you're recognizing revenue and how you're recognizing cost. And really become a business person, even if you've come from a purely technical background, because that's your role. Your role is at worst to enable the business through technology, but generally to create value. And to do that, you've got to understand the business side of it and the commercial side. So
Mhm.
really focus on that. Um,
Should
yeah. And
really.
investor-backed companies generally run everything by some kind of commercial metrics. So you need to understand what they mean.
Mhm. Really good advice. And I guess particularly people that come through a purely technology route, that's sometimes quite difficult to get that exposure and experience. It does mean taking time out of your day job to really get into the skin of the business and understand those different functions and how they make, so, they impact your role.
But spend time with the people in those other departments. The finance department, I was a nightmare for them. I was always chatting to them and asking them stupid questions and saying, "Oh, well, if I do this, what happens to the budget?" and if etc. And spend time with the sales department, spend time with everyone who does that business side of the business. And don't be afraid to say, I don't understand. That's one of the most powerful things you can have as certainly as a leader, is to say, sorry, I don't understand that. Can we just go back over it? Can you explain it to me as if I'm really stupid? And yeah, just brave enough to do that. That's the other piece of advice.
Sure. And I guess to wrap up our conversation, as we look ahead to the year ahead, I know you have recently left Lineup after a successful long tenure, particularly as CIO. What do you think are the key challenges that any CIO, CTO will face in 2026?
Well, predictably, I'm going to have to talk about AI because it's affecting everyone's plans, everyone's budgets, etc. AI is something that people need to get their heads around. As a CIO, I really think we have to start thinking about AI differently. At the moment, where everyone is getting some benefit, localized tactical benefit. You know, someone's job gets slightly easier because they're using ChatGPT, or someone else's job gets slightly quicker because they're using Microsoft Copilot. It's small tactical gains that aren't really making their way through to the balance sheet. They're not showing actual value to the company. And we've got to change the way of thinking about it. We've got to go back to really what happened with digital transformation. We've got to start thinking about AI transformation. We've got to think about the value chain of the company, how it makes money, how it generates value, and where AI can play a role in that end to end, not just in small, tactical, localized, isolated islands, but as a strategic way of using AI across the business, and how you create the value and how you deliver that value. It's got to completely change, not just everyone loves a bit of ChatGPT. I think a big worry that comes with that is security. I don't think most people understand when they're putting stuff into large language models like ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. They've kind of lost control of the information they put in there generally. There are some checks and balances you can put in place to protect it, but there was a big thing a few years ago with Samsung, I think it was, had been using ChatGPT and been putting loads of commercially sensitive information in there and asking questions. And that was used for training the next model, and it started appearing in other people's answers.
Right.
So with the AI stuff, we've really got to start to educate people and raise awareness on what they're doing when they're asking questions of these LLMs, and making sure they don't put private information in there or commercially confidential information or anything like that. That's an educational thing that everyone needs to go through. I think a really big thing that's on the horizon, maybe not this year, but in the next couple of years, two slightly connected things. One is the rush to put everything in the cloud seems to have leveled off. And I think it would be good for everyone to start reviewing how they're hosting, what services they're consuming, where their data is. I think a more hybrid model is going to start to emerge over the next few years, where people don't just have everything as a service from a cloud provider, but they've got some things that work well that way, and maybe some things that they're hosting themselves. And along with that, the global political situation at the moment is exciting. And I mean that in an understated English way. And that's going to change, I think, how globalized technology works. I think we'll start to see regionalization of things. I think where we're putting things into global cloud services and not necessarily knowing where they are or how they're provided, I think you're going to start to see localization and regionalization of these services, partly for data privacy reasons, partly for political reasons. With the AI, probably partly for power supply reasons. There's a really interesting report just come out from MIT about AI power consumption, which everyone should read. It's fascinating and terrifying. And that's probably going to start to fragment geographically where our services are coming from.
Interesting. Well, we'll watch this space and see what happens in the next 12 to 18 months, and I'll share a link to that article as well that you mentioned. Excellent, Rob. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to hear about your journey and some of the exciting things that you did, particularly in your most recent role as a CIO. Thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks very much. Really enjoyed it.
Brilliant. Thank you.